Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hillary Wank. I am the Manager of Operations here at JCC Chicago for Community Engagement. We're delighted to have you with us today, and it's my pleasure, as always, to introduce Robb Packer. I think this is our fifth installment of the Synagogues of Chicago. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen, and we are going to get started.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here with everyone. Just a little bit of background. Almost 20 years ago, I started writing and taking pictures of old synagogues of Chicago. And as my career as a building inspector, I always wondered what had happened to all these different synagogues and buildings in all these different neighborhoods. And what you see today is literally the culmination of one, COVID and being locked in my house for a year and a half. And I've produced this 500-page book, which will come out eventually. And today we're going to talk about the synagogues of Chicago from Maxwell Street all the way down the lakefront to Uptown. So this is a new program that's never been seen before. And this is images that probably haven't been seen in over 50 to 60 years. So we're ready to start, Hillary. Thank you. Okay, so this is Beth Hamadresh Hagadol, which of course exists today in Skokie on Gulf Road. And this is the first major building that they produced on 134 Pacific, which is near LaSalle Street today. Next, please. B'nai Abraham at 14th and Sagamon. So this is in the Maxwell Street area, what was originally called the Near West Side. Next, please. Okay, this is B'nai Abraham. It was at 1112 on Marshfield Avenue. This is an illustration. I think we have the actual building coming up next. Here we go. I apologize for the blurry image, but this is the best image that we have that was taken in 1902. The image on the right is from Midas's History of the Jews of Chicago. B'nai Abraham, as you know, today exists in Oak Park as B'nai Abraham Zion, the Oak Park Temple. Next, please. Okay, we can go next. Here we go. This is Anshe Knesset Israel, which most of you know is the Rosh Hashanah or the Russian synagogue on Roosevelt or 12th Street and Clinton Avenue. Next, please. This is Ohavi Shalom Mariampol. Now, today, of course, it's B'nai Israel Anshe Shalom over on Melrose Avenue, but way back in the day at Canal and Liberty, this is where they started this really beautiful building. Next, please. Okay, here's a more realistic view of what it looked like in the old days. It was there since from 1870 until they moved up north in 1911. Next, please. Okay, in the actual, right off of Maxwell Street in Newbury was the Havas Hachem. And what's great about this one is that even though the building no longer exists, it's still in existence today, and it's all the way up north near Kedzie Avenue on the far north side. Next, please. This is B'nai Yitzchak. This is on Morgan Street, just 1300 West. And as you probably will realize that none of these buildings are there today. But this is one of the great buildings from the Cushing catalog in Indiana University. Next, please. On the far south end of the Near West Side, of course, was B'nai Jehoshua, which was at 20th and Halsted Street. Excuse me, at 20th and Halsted Street. This was their first incarnation in 1898. Next, please. They later moved to Ashland and 20th, and today, of course, they're in Deerfield. Next, please. Next. Okay, here we have the interior. So this is very rare. So the middle two images and the picture on the right shows B'nai Jehoshua until roughly the 1960s and 70s when it was bought by St. Pius. It was their community center for a while, and then it was torn down. Next, please. Okay, community has always been important to the Chicago Jewish community, and this was the first Chicago Hebrew Institute. As you notice, it says CHI. So if any of you have ever gone to Camp Chi, it was actually Chicago Hebrew Institute, and this was on Blue Island Avenue, right in the middle of the Maxwell Street area. Next, please. Okay, and this, up until recently, Union Street near 14th, the building on the right was the Romanian synagogue. The building on the left was Polit Tzedek. And up until about, I'd like to say about 7, 8 years ago, the building, which later became a church, was originally a German church, became the Romanian synagogue. Then it became a Baptist church again, and then it became like an incubator building, and it was just recently torn down. Recently means anything within the last 10 years. Here, yes, you can go ahead. Next is, I was able to isolate Polit Tzedek to give you a much sharper, brighter image of what it looked like. It was a very beautiful frame synagogue. Next, please. You can go next, and we already saw that. Next, here we go. And right above Polit Tzedek, there was this, the advertisement for when the services were for Mincha Myra and also for Yurtzeit, which of course was very common in the old days. Next, please. This was an actual picture of First Romanian when it was still a synagogue. This comes from their 30th anniversary booklet, which I haven't very rarely, but I do have a copy of it. And it explains the whole history of the Romanian people coming to Chicago in the late 1880s, early 1890s. Next, please. Also on Union Street was B'nai Shalom. And at one time in the Maxwell Street community where we are right now, they had over 40 synagogues. And it's amazing today that now one exists in one form or another, 0. Next, please. Okay, also run by the Jewish community was the Chicago Maternity Center, also known as the Newberry Center on Maxwell Street. This is a better illustration of what it looked like in the late 50s, early 60s. Next, please. This was the Helen Day Nursery School on Halsted and Maxwell Street. So as you can tell, because of the great influx of immigration between 1880 and 1920, the Jewish community really had to come together to help all these new immigrants that were coming to the United States and specifically to Chicago. Next, please. Next. Okay. Our first major synagogue in the area really was a Agudath Achem Ungari, or First Hungarian synagogue over on Marshfield and Polk. Now we're actually at the farther north end of the near west or the Maxwell Street community. Next, please. This is a picture of the same picture, but this is an illustration from Midas's History of the Jews of Chicago. At one point, I only had this illustration till the other one came available this year. Next, please. The cantor of First Hungarian was Cantor Newman, and it just happens he's the great-great-grandfather of one of my classmates growing up in East Rogers Park in Chicago. So thank you, Judy Newman, and shout out to her and her family for providing us with this great photo of Cantor Morris Newman. Next, please. So not all synagogues end up in a glamorous history of either being a Jewish synagogue or a Baptist church. This one turned into a beverage center for liquor distribution on Taylor Street. This was Sherry Tzedek. Next, please. Also on Marshfield was B'nai Reuben. They were there they bought their synagogue from an existing congregation and later sold to another Jewish congregation. Next, please. So one of my favorites, and this was by Percy Hayden Sloan, was B'nai Moshe at 901 Paulina. And as you can see, this is just was a magnificent Moorish style synagogue. And of course, like everything else that we're talking about, this only exists in the program today and in my forthcoming book, which will come out eventually. Next, please. This is Zion Temple, which was on Ogden and Washington. So this is on the far west reaches of the near west side community. And it was there up until, I would say, around 1920, 1930, when it was torn down due to urban renewal. Next, please. So here's the actual photo. As you can see, it was beautiful. It was designed by Adler and Sullivan, and I believe it was their last joint commission of a new building. They later did a remodel of Sinai Congregation in 1892. As you can see on the lower right is an image of the interior, which is absolutely magnificent. We really did build beautiful buildings in the day. Next, please. Excuse me. On the near west portion of the area, this is at Ashland and Polk. Today it's St. Basil's Greek Orthodox Church. And if you go there today, you can actually still see above the pediment or the lintel there, it still says Ohavi Shalom Mariam Pole in gold leaf. And this was, excuse me, can you go back there once? Yeah. So this was here up until, so it was built in 1910 and 26 was sold to St. Basil's Greek Orthodox Church, and this synagogue congregation moved to the west side. Next, please. So the first Talmud Torah was Yeshiva Eitz Chaim on Peoria Street, Peoria and Maxwell. And this is the earliest known building and congregation or school of its kind in 1900. Next, please. So Chicago Hebrew Institute later bought the Sacred Heart Convent, and this was on Taylor and Little, again, right in the middle, literally, of Little Italy, or the near west side, as we call it. And thanks to the largest of Julius Rosenwald, they were able to buy this building and the surrounding buildings and property. This was the gymnasium of the community center. Next, please. This was the chapel. Like I said, all these buildings have one thing in common, is that somewhere along the way there was a house of worship in it, or a little chapel, or a full-blown synagogue. Next, please. Okay, this is in front of the gymnasium, and this was a trip in 1920 that a group of actually newly arrived immigrants decided to come back, and with their finery of being in Chicago and proud Americans, were going back to visit their homeland. Next, please. Okay, Hull House, now, even though specifically not a Jewish organization, still had a lot of Jewish input and support from the community, because it was one of the mainstays when Jewish immigrants first came to America in Chicago and in the Maxwell Street area. Next, please. This was the Jewish training school at Clinton and Jefferson, roughly near Jefferson and 12th Street. And here you can see on the right, an actual picture of the building. Next, please. And here you have, see all those really happy faces of the kids matriculating in their school program. Next, please. Okay, this was the Moses Montefiore Talmud Torah at Judd, which is 12th and Clinton. They originally were at Canal Maxwell, which is this figure on the right. And then the figure on the left was built right around between 1908 and 1909. And because all these social programs were so successful, they went out of business. That's how good we did. Next, please. Now, if you know where the Kluzinski Federal Building today, near Clark and Quincy, what was there originally was the U.S. Post Office, and part of that was the first Chicago Synagogue building, KAM, Kehileth, Anshe Mariv, Congregation of the Men of the West. Now, when I took this picture, that was the original picture that was on the post office building at the turn of the century. When I took the picture on the left, I didn't realize you weren't allowed to photograph federal buildings. This was right after 9/11. So I got chased away, and I thought the FBI would be waiting for me. And the lower right, you can actually see the ceremony of the middle photo of the plaque being attached to the old post office building. So these are some very rare images that you're seeing today. Next, please. Okay, so the oldest Reformed synagogue in Chicago is Sinai Congregation. And even though KM is now Reformed, it wasn't originally Reformed, and KM, of course, is part of Isaiah Israel. So Sinai, since 1861, is the oldest synagogue that has never been merged or affiliated with any other congregation. And this is actually a first generation image from the original plate that came from an advertisement for a bank. Next, please. B'nai Shalom, which again is part of Isaiah Israel today, or KAM Isaiah Israel, was the first breakaway from KAM. In 1864, they built this modest synagogue on Harrison. Also, now 10 years later, in 1871, was Bethel's first congregation at May and Huron in 1871. Next, please. North Chicago Hebrew congregation, which you know today as Temple Sholem, built their second synagogue at LaSalle and Goethe, and it was there up until the 1960s when the property was sold to St. Paul's Church. And so their church is there today, and this is the only known images of their first synagogue. Next, please. Now, Chicago Loop Synagogue, which is, if you've been in, we've probably noticed has been in the paper recently, was originally built in the 1920s. You can see here they had a fire, they had rebuilt it in the 30s. So it's literally right next to the original building that's there today. Next, please. And this is the interior. Again, a very rare photo we got from my friend, Carrie Wintergreen, who's part of the Chicago Jewish Historical Society. Thank you, Carrie, for that great image. Next, please. This is how it is today. So since '59, when it was rebuilt again on Clark Street, this is where it is till today. Next, please. We have this beautiful interior with, sorry about that. So we have this beautiful interior with Abraham's beautiful, beautiful stained glass window that was installed. That wasn't there originally. This was part of the remodel from Abraham Ratner. Next, please. Park Synagogue, which some of you may or may not know, was around for about 20, 30 years, and they were in the ballroom of the Sheraton Chicago Hotel on North Michigan Avenue. The reason I have this illustration is because it's now a newer hotel and it doesn't look anything like the old hotel. Next, please. But here we have a rare photo of Rabbi in the cantor. That's Paul Zim. I don't know if you've ever heard him chant or in concert. The man has the most beautiful voice I think I've ever heard, and that's Rabbi Kleinman. Next, please. This is Kol Ami. Kol Ami, which is originally South Shore Temple, was domiciled after moving from the South Side to Water Tower Place. And then they would later, when they dissolved their congregation, it was taken over by Central Synagogue, which again was originally South Side Hebrew congregation. Next, please. Here is Central Synagogue. When they moved from Chappelle on the South Side, they bought this beautiful townhouse at 30 East Cedar, and they were here from roughly 1970 till around 2000 or so. Next, please. One of the very still active synagogues is this traditional synagogue, Lakeshore Drive Synagogue at 70 East Elm. Next, please.
Chicago Jewish history.
And of course, this is Lakeshore. This is the interior. You can see how beautiful their stained glass windows are and their bima. Next, please.
This is live.
Yeah, it's a Zoom.
Okay. Central Synagogue went through many different locations, and today they're in the People's Gas Building at 122 South Michigan Avenue.
They're not
Next, please.
comprehensive because they're really long.
Yeah.
So I can either send you PDFs electronically or you could, okay. Sorry.
Can everyone please make sure they're muted because we can hear your conversations? Thank you.
And it's very interesting, by the way. Thank you. Next, please. Okay, the original Covenant Club was at 10 North Dearborn. They were there for a number of years until, next. They moved to these headquarters and were there till the mid-1980s when they dissolved their organization. Next, please. This was the JUF building on Franklin Street, and it was there for decades and decades and decades until they changed and downsized, and so this was later torn down. Here we have what was formerly the Standard Club on Plymouth Court. The building is still there. I believe the Standard Club still exists. It just no longer exists in this building. So after 120 years or so, 130 years, they're still there. They're just in different quarters, and I suspect they've downsized quite a bit. Next, please. Okay, Henroden Hospital, one of several Jewish-oriented or hospitals that had, of course, a chapel in it. This was built at a time when Jewish doctors had a hard time being on staff or having privileges at other hospitals. This was on Oak Street and LaSalle. Of course, it has the distinction of where I had my tonsils out. Very, very nice place. Next, please. Okay, now as we move from Maxwell Street in downtown into the Old Town area, this is Anshe Emet, their first location in 1892 on Sedgwick Avenue. Next, please. It later became B'nai Israel, and then, of course, they sold it to Pillar Rock, and then Pillar Rock sold it to a Muslim community, a Muslim temple. So here you have one building fulfilling three different forms of religion: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And of course, like everything else in Chicago, when it comes to synagogue buildings, it was torn down. Today, it's just an empty lot with horses on it, interestingly enough. Next, please. Okay, also on Wells, near Lincoln, near Wells Street, was the home for the Jewish friendless and working girls. This illustration comes from Midas. And actually, when I was originally in business, this building was still there up until the 1980s. Next, please. Okay, Chicago Sinai Congregation has gone through many iterations from 1861, and in 1990, they moved from Hyde Park to West of Delaware Street, and this is where they are today. Next, please. North Chicago Hebrew Congregation, which was on Grace on the north, and in Lincoln on the north side, later became Anshe Emet. But North Chicago, of course, you realize, later became Temple Sholem, and they moved to Lakeshore Drive. But in 1909, 1911, this was designed by Alfred Altschuler for North Chicago Hebrew Congregation. Anshe Emet took it over in 1929. Not great timing for an expensive purchase. Next, please. Okay, it's 701 Buckingham, and one of the first condo conversions in Chicago was Temple EMANUEL, built in 1907. It was in 1907, then it burned down and it was rebuilt. And today it still exists. And the only reason I was able to realize that this condo building was a synagogue, because there's trees all over the place, so it's really hard to even see the Temple EMANUEL, but I was able to find the cornerstone. So that's when it was built in 1907. Next, please. Anshe Emet on Patterson was there from roughly from around 1900 to 1929. They moved from Wells Street to Patterson Avenue, and then later, of course, they moved to Pine Grove. Next, please. This is also a condo building. Later, Anshe Emet sold to Anshe Mizrach. They had moved their congregation from South Michigan Avenue to the north side. Next, please. Okay, and here is North Chicago Hebrew Congregation, or today it's known as Temple Sholem, built in 1929 on Lakeshore Drive. And it was an absolutely beautiful building. You can tell by the illustration on the left, the tower on the top was supposed to be a lot more elaborate, and it became much simpler. And you'll see that throughout the program, that you'll see some illustrations that are very elaborate, and the actual synagogue is much more modern and much simpler due to costs. Next, please. And this, of course, is B'nai Shalom, Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel. Anshe Shalom moved from the west side in the 1950s, but in 1940 they wanted a north side outpost, and when B'nai Israel closed on Sedgwick, they all merged in around 1960. So by 1960, the west side was closed, Wells Street was closed, and they all became Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel on Melrose, where they are today. Next, please. Okay, next to them, literally just east of them, is the Florence Heller JCC. And next, please. And before that,
We share a driveway with the synagogue, and it's like you can almost touch the walls.
Which is very nice.
And in that driveway.
And then before that, next, please. Okay, before that, of course, it was the Associate Talmud Torah Center. So they were there for a number of years, and then they sold to become the Florence Heller JCC. Next, please. Okay, There is a Chabad Center on Dearborn, and since we're downtown, we thought we'd throw that in, even though it's an existing active congregation. They are at 1236 Dearborn. Next, please. At 836 Aldine, Ezra congregation, this is their first permanent location, was originally a church. They purchased it in the 1930s and was here until the 1950s when they purchased another former Greek church. Next, please. This is a Agudas Achim North Shore. You had seen the one that was first Hungarian that was over on Marshfield. In the 1920s, they purchased this they built this building on Kenmore, and they were there until the 1950s, excuse me, the 1960s, 70s, when the congregation really left the area. It was taken over by as a Russian Orthodox Jewish congregation. Then it went into disrepair, and then last year, the year before, it became a residential building. It was rehabbed, and I believe all the beautiful windows are in storage. We're still investigating that. But the image on the left was from Midas, History of the Jews of Chicago. The image in the middle was taken by the late Steve Grubman, and the interior was taken by Preservation Chicago and Carrie Wintergreen. Next, please. Okay, Ezra went from Aldine to Winthrop. This had been St. Andrew's Greek Orthodox Church, which, if you know, today is on Sheridan Road, and it's a gorgeous, beautiful gray stone building. But Ezra bought this, repurposed it as a synagogue, and was here till the early mid-1960s when they moved to Toohey Avenue. Next, please. Okay, Agudas Chabad. This is, if anyone's out there, so this is a shout out to everybody. If anyone has a picture of Agudas Chabad, this is on Winthrop Street, 5039 to 5041. And if anyone has a picture of the building, it's a simple building, and I don't even know what to tell you what if it was a 1 flat, a 2 flat, a house. But the Aron Kodesh was built by my friend Mark Staffsy's grandfather. So we thank Mark for this wonderful image, which is the only known image of anything to do with Agudas Chabad. Next, please. Okay, Temple EMANUEL moved from Buckingham in the late 50s to 5959 Sheridan Road, where they are still there today. Next, please. Next along the route on Sheridan Road is North Sheridan Hebrew Congregation, also known as Shoreline Towers. When the original developer built this, he made sure for he and his wife and a few friends that lived in the building that they had their own small chapel synagogue. And they were there up until, I want to say, let me just think for a second. I'm thinking probably sometime in the late 90s when they, disbanded their congregation. Next, please. So this is Kesser Torah, also known as the Sovereign Synagogue. I suspect it was Sovereign because it probably may have started in the Sovereign Hotel. Later, they had a room in this apartment building, later a senior citizens residence at 6159 Kenmore. The building is still there today. Of course, the congregation is not. Okay, at 930 Argyle is the Self-Help Home. This was founded by German Jewish refugees in the 1930s. And to this day, it's a very active German Jewish run old age home. And we're talking residents that are probably averaging 90 years of age. So very hardy people, very good stock. And it's a testament to how well the staff is taking care of their residents, something to be very proud of. Okay. Nothing would be complete unless we get a few funeral homes in there. Okay, and this was originally Jaffe and Albert Funeral Home. The building is still there. It is a church today, and it's one of several North Side funeral homes that later became churches or other businesses. Next, please. This was the Pizer Funeral Home at 5206 North Broadway. Again, it was here for decades and decades, but it has been an active, the building is still there, I believe, but it hasn't been an active Jewish funeral home for, over 20 years or maybe longer. Next, please. And I think is that it? That takes us to our end? Perfect. Well, I hope you've all enjoyed a nicer smoother going talk about areas of Chicago that most people are really not even aware of. And if you have any questions, I'm certainly more than happy to entertain and answer them.
I do have some questions. What happened to the interiors of the demolished temples, the stained glass windows, pews, Torahs, books? That comes from Susan.
Okay, so as a general rule, the Torahs were just donated to other synagogues. They never just were left to, to dissipate or were they damaged or something else was done with them. So they've all gone to other synagogues, either in the United States, Canada, or even Europe for that sake. The stained glass windows, almost 99% of them were all preserved. In the case, for example, of Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel and Melrose, those windows in their synagogue are from the original Albany Park Hebrew congregation. So we've been very good at repurposing the windows that, the former synagogues. Now, in the case of places like Sinai and Rofe Tzedek, they have reused their ritual objects, their menorahs and their stained glass windows and all their subsequent windows. I hope that answers the question.
Linda says Pfizer Funeral Home is not there. It is a strip center now.
Okay, like I said, the last time I was there, the building was still there. It was no longer active. So the fact that it's a strip center is not a total shock, but I do appreciate the update. That's good to know. Thank you.
And Alan said, happy anniversary.
Thank you, Alan.
Let's see. Cindy said, great job.
Thank you.
So I have a question.
Cindy doesn't count. That's my sister.
Everybody counts. Everybody counts.
Thank you, Cindy.
Yes, this has been recorded and it is on our YouTube page, which I can put in the chat in a moment. Once, Rob, do you have? So this is the 5th one that we've done together.
Yes.
And I didn't grow up here. So for me, this is fascinating because, I know the few synagogues that I know from living in the suburbs, but do you have a particular synagogue that is your favorite because of the architecture or the interior?
Well, I have 2 favorites. My first favorite was Beth Yitzchak that was on Drake Avenue, the Drake Avenue Shul, because that was my wife's family's synagogue. And that's the first one I went looking for. It had nothing to do with this program, but that's what started me on doing the project that you see today that I've been doing for over 20 years. So that's my favorite because that was the impetus for doing all of this. Probably my favorite building is Anshe Shalom, originally Ohave Shalom at Polk and Independence Boulevard. It is a Seventh-day Adventist church today, and because they're so respectful of their Jewish heritage, because they have their services on Saturday and they observe our Sabbath versus a later Sabbath that was conjured up by Constantine for Sunday. The interior is identical as it was in the late 50s, early 60s when the congregation left the west side for the north side. So when you walk into this building, first of all, the people are wonderful. The pastor's wonderful. The members, the congregates are just very warm, as they are in many, many of the Black churches or Hispanic churches that were originally synagogues. But the architecture but the stained glass windows are the most magnificent I've ever seen. The only ones more magnificent would have been KAM that burned over at 33rd and Indiana. So yeah, those are just amazing to me that they're so well preserved. Anything else?
Just put in the chat box is the link to our JCC Chicago YouTube channel. So you can go back and see all of Rob's other programs with us. Do we have any other questions in the audience here? Do we have any more locations we're going to get to do?
Yeah, for us together, yes. You and I have 1 or 2. Well, we've never done the suburbs together, so I'm thinking that we can do it. Suburbs don't have a lot of, there's not a lot. So maybe if we combine the west side, the north side, and the south side, there's lots of former synagogues there's many active synagogues still in the Chicago suburban areas. So if we did East Rogers Park, which of course had a number of synagogues that no longer exist and community buildings, that maybe we can combine that with some, maybe a clean up some of the stuff that came in since I started the program a year ago. And then we'll talk about putting together maybe an all suburban program, because I think that would be of great interest to many of the people that are on, that view these Zoom programs, because many of them still live in the suburbs. So they may be former active members of Hoffman Estates, or, Joliet, or some of the others. And they had, up until recently, some very, very active synagogues. In fact, some have gone from the South Side and joined with Indiana, which has been having their own problems. So it's very interesting how we've reached out, going to the northern suburbs and possibly up to Wisconsin, and the southern suburbs, and going over to Indiana. So yeah, I think there's a couple of some very interesting things that I've researched over the years, and you can tell me I can tell you what we have, and you can tell me what you think of the ideas, and we can go from there. But I've really enjoyed answering questions from your groups. I love the follow-up questions, bringing this program, especially due to COVID and everything, and the restrictions of things that I would normally have been able to do in person. It's wonderful to be able to reach out to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people over the last year and a half and bring to me, I think this is fascinating. I know it's no longer fascinating to my wife, because I think she's heard this over for the last 20 years, okay? But I think it's really nice to be able to talk to people and to reach out and to explain why I think this is so interesting, because I do believe, I'm 71, so I'm the youngest guy who's doing this, believe it or not. So, and after a while, I don't know if people are ever going to ask, about this synagogue or that synagogue, but I think as a trove and as an archive, at some point, someone's going to need to know or ask questions and get good information. And that's what I've tried to do, and I hope I've come close to succeeding on that level.
Do you have any idea how many synagogues that were in the city actually moved to the suburbs?
Okay, well, let's look at it this way. Let's start with West Rogers Park. So West Rogers Park has the largest concentration of synagogues in Chicago. Okay, there's a smattering of them on the south side and on the north side. We all know about KM Isaiah Israel, and we know about Lakeshore Drive Congregation and Central Synagogue, and we know about Anshe Emet. So there's synagogues that have been around for 120, 30 years, and they're still in there, and they seem to be not just thriving, surviving, they're thriving. Everything else has either gone to West Rogers Park, so that's the good news. So in the 1950s, when the west side was being emptied out and the south side was changing overnight, so South Shore, most of their residents went to the south suburbs, Olympia Fields and Flossmoor, Homewood, and all those areas, Joliet. But a lot of the people started going north to either Rogers Park, or they skipped over Chicago and went to Skokie or Northbrook, and later on to my old community and my old new community in Buffalo Grove. So I can do a spreadsheet and tell you exactly, but a lot of the original synagogues that started are in West Rogers Park. So many of the synagogues are still, quote unquote, they're still in the city of Chicago. The ones that have gone to the suburbs, with the exception of Oak Park Temple, which started on the west side and then moved to Garfield Park, and then in the 1950s, they had the vision of going to Oak Park. Just like Bethel, which had started on May Street back in 1871, moved to Crystal, moved to Palmer, then moved to Tui in Rogers Park. Rabbi, what's his name? Victor Weisberg, Dr. Weisberg had the vision of moving that. Not only did he move from Logan Square to West Rogers Park, he had the vision to realize his congregation was moving suburban, and they, started in Northbrook in the 80s, in the late 80s, early 90s. So there are a few like that, but most of the Chicago synagogues are still in Chicago. The few that have Chicago roots are pretty easy to find out. Most of all the rest of them have been founded, in the suburbs by people that are either moving to Morton Grove and Skokie, really up until recently, probably is like almost like the old West Side. They have more synagogues and funeral homes and community organizations and community centers than any suburban city in the Chicago metro area. So when you look up all the different institutions that are in Skokie or have merged in Skokie, like Skokie Valley Congregation, which was originally a Gudath Achem, and what's the other one? There's 3 different synagogues that are now part of Skokie Valley. So there's things like that, and that's pretty easy to trace. So we can do that as part of when we like programs like this, which are a little bit shorter because we're taking a big area that has very few synagogues. So with the exception, what's interesting, so what we saw today, with the exception only the one synagogue on Winthrop, Agudas Chabad, we were able to find every single synagogue that ever existed from Old Town all the way up north to Uptown. Of course, we don't have everyone that was in the 40 that were in the Maxwell Street area, but we had over 22 buildings, which is incredible. And that's really thanks to the internet and Ryerson and Burnham libraries and the Newberry Library and all the different people that have contributed to my Facebook group, Synagogues of Chicago. So that, plus the people that have questions when they come to your JCC programs, have made it. I could be anywhere in the world and do my program today, which is like, that's amazing to me, that I can reach out and talk to people in real time and answer questions about their grandparents, their great-grandparents. It seems like every week I'm getting an email or a text about, did you ever hear about this? And in the old days, I never heard about any of them. And now we have all this, 20 years later, I have this great information. But just so that all your audience doesn't think that I'm, really that evolved, I still don't remember to take out the garbage. Somehow it could be right in front of me, but I can trip over it, but I don't remember to take it out. But I do remember literally thousands of facts and addresses and information about rabbis and cantors and buildings,
Yep.
and, which is, I get a couple of gold stars for that from my wife.
We do have a couple more questions. So
Sure.
Linda wants to know, did the Loop Synagogue make a transition from something called traditional to Orthodox?
Actually, it's the other way around. It was originally Loop Orthodox Synagogue, and it's made the transition to traditional. So I'm not sure about how the Orthodox fit in, but it was in 1929 till at least the 1950s, it was considered an Orthodox synagogue, but certainly in the last several decades, it's considered a traditional synagogue. But in Chicago, traditional and Orthodox kind of skew each other. So there's no it's not like being Reform or conservative. When you're traditional Orthodox kind of share a lot of the same spaces, with the exception of possibly, communal sitting. For example, like Lincolnwood Congregation, which was originally a traditional synagogue with communal seating. Now they're 100% Orthodox or modern Orthodox with separate seating.
Diane is asking, why were papers strewn over the bema floor in the synagogue with the arch? That was the interior that we had of the bema, and there were books and papers all strewn around. Because
that was a building that was being vacated. And what happened was, if you're familiar with the term Geniza, it's where they used to hide things, books and taluses that were all worn out. This was discovered underneath the bema. And it wasn't strewn so much as they was actually being laid out, and they were trying to organize and separate what they had there. So it's just a miscue. It really wasn't just thrown helter-skelter. They discovered this Geniza, and they were actually inventorying what was in there. And they were just laying out everything to find out what was there.
And then she's also asking, does Michigan Avenue Synagogue have Shabbat services?
Okay, so you're talking about Central Synagogue, with Cantor Toby Heyman. I believe they do. You certainly can. You can go online, or you can and get their phone number. You can talk to the cantor who runs the Central Synagogue on Michigan Avenue. And I believe, I'm not sure what their hours or their programs are, but if you go online to Central Synagogue of Chicago, I'm sure you can get all the information from the cantor there as far as if they have services every week or if it's twice a month. I'm not exactly sure.
So Cheryl says, when Road-Faced Shalom or Hadash was closing, my father was on the Assets Distribution Committee. One day his friend called to say there was a meeting of the Assets Redistribution Committee the next night. Turns out that was their poker game.
Oh, okay. All right. So do you want me to address what happened to them or to the poker game?
Tell us what happened.
Okay. So in the late 60s, early 70s, as South Shore, this was Pill Hill, Calumet Heights, where Road-Faced Shalom or Hadash was. As the community was changing rapidly, it wasn't a slow transition like many communities in Chicago. This literally overnight, people were moving out. They made a decision, well, obviously the membership had depleted, had decreased, and so they merged with Road-Faced Tzedek in Hyde Park. So everything, all their ritual objects, I believe, their plaques, everything went there, okay? I don't know if Road-Faced Shalom had stained glass windows. When I had photographed it, it was already a public school. So the building was intact, and it's a beautiful building with an auditorium, et cetera. But I don't know if they had stained glass windows, they would have gone there, I believe. But if you called Road-Faced Tzedek, I bet you they would have a very clear idea, even though it was 50 years, wow, okay. Even though it was 50 years ago, I'm sure they would know exactly what what had happened. Very similar to what happened to North Park Shared Tzedek. At one time, Albany Park Hebrew congregation and several other congregations were all there. Then they merged with Ner Tamid. Now, I believe there is still a Ner Tamid. I believe it's on Western Avenue. So there were like 4 or 5 synagogues that were part of that. So I believe you have 2 sources. You can either go to whoever the successor synagogue is today, which there are some. In some cases, like Romanian, where my grandparents went, there's nothing. They disappeared, and that was it. Or you can go to the Chicago Jewish Historical Society. They have amazing resources. Of course, because of COVID now, there's not a lot of people there. So the first thing I would do is I would contact, in your case, Road-Faced Tzedek, and ask them, what exactly happened in 1971, besides the poker game, which only the members there, if they're still around, can tell you about. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Here I am. There's a lot of noise in the building today, so I'm trying to.
Oh, no, I'm not hearing any. You're clear as a bell. It's great.
I know, because I keep muting myself.
Oh, okay.
Yep, I think that's
Susan.
it.
Hi, Cheryl.
I don't think there are any other questions. So Rob, as always, thank you so much. I always enjoy doing this. It's a process for Rob and I. He sends me pictures. I put them into the PowerPoint, and then
I overwhelm her. I give her the wrong information. Then I have to correct it.
Never. And then we meet a few times to sort of put it in an order and make sure I have all the addresses correctly. So for me, it's really enjoyable to learn about, a place that, even though I've lived here for 20 odd years, I still am not familiar with lots of things. So I appreciate it. And I know our community does. So just a reminder, we're getting back into, programming. We took a little hiatus over the summer, but we're doing in-person and online programming still. So you can visit our website, jccchicago.org. We've got some author talks coming up. This month is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So we have a program on the 21st, recognizing that, where we'll learn to braid challah. We'll hear from a breast surgeon. We'll hear from a survivor. You'll hear a little bit about my story, and we're partnering with Shersheret on this. So please visit our website for that, and stay tuned for the next installment.
Well, Hillary, I want to thank you as always. You are a wonderful partner. You make this You make my job effortless, and I really appreciate it. I didn't want to not say hi, Linda, and thank you for your questions. Hi, Sharon. I see you're on there now. So thank you, everyone. If there's any follow-up questions, you can get them to Hillary. She will get them to me. At your convenience, Hillary, we should talk about going forward. I do have a question for you on something else. So.
All right, awesome. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank
It
you.
was nice seeing everybody.
Good to see everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.